Good afternoon, everyone. Let's see if this works. As introduced, I'm Aldrin. I am an ecologist. You can call me Aldrin or you can call me Mine. Yeah, po yun. Right. So, thank you for having us here. Today, I want us to reimagine. I want us to, I'd like to change how this room thinks about climate disasters and what climate destroys. Not just infrastructure, but forests, reefs, species found nowhere else in the world. I'm presenting the GARF, or the Green Assessment and Recovery Framework that we developed 4 years ago now, I think. And this is, I'll present the evidence from Super Typhoon Rai, or Odette in the Philippines. And one phrase will anchor my talk this afternoon. If we don't count it, it does not count. So my friends, this is the Philippines, if you can find it. Every line in this map is a typhoon since 1951. Can you see the Philippines? Parang ginurigo rin ang anak ko, no? The Philippines takes roughly 20 of these typhoons every year. Typhoon Rai jumped from category 1 to category 5 in just 24 hours. So imagine having 20 of these every year. There's an update in this slide, and that is the Philippines ranked now number 1, not the 3rd, in the most disaster-prone nation globally. In December 2021, Super Typhoon Odette, or Rai, struck Palawan and Siargao. These islands are both biodiverse and one of the most biodiverse sites in the Pacific. Post-disaster assessments accounted for infrastructure, crops, and livestock. Mangroves that buffered communities from storm surges were omitted. Coral reefs that sustain fisheries were omitted. Endemic species driven closer to extinction received no mention. After each storm, we tally bridges and homes, or damage to bridges and homes. Nature's losses go unrecorded. The Warsaw International Mechanism calls for action on non-economic losses. However, a mandate to act and the tools to measure are fundamentally different in requirements. So if we don't count it, it does not count. This is not stock photo. This is a sort of a video or GIF of our researchers who waded into devastated river valleys weeks after the typhoon. Stripped bare, barely passable. This is what ecological assessments look like after a disaster, or in a disaster zone. Now, onto the GARF. The Green Assessment Recovery Framework works in 3 stages. The first stage is triage, the second is the diagnosis, and the third is treatment. If you look at the first stage, or the triage stage, within days we compare pre and post disaster satellite images to map the damage footprint. This is fast and scalable. At stage 2, if you look at the illustration, we used drones, we did rapid biodiversity assessments, and community focus groups. And these captured what satellites miss. Rigorous science meets human stories. The third stage, which is a recovery stage, is developing green recovery plans and restoration, looking at the restoration typologies. So the typologies that we develop show evidence that drives recovery, not guesswork. Replicable for policymakers, peer reviewable for scientists, and deployment ready for funders. The headline that should trouble everyone in this room is this: 57% of pre-typhoon forest cover destroyed. That means over 125,000 hectares, and I repeat that, 125,000 hectares of forest gone in a single weather event. How often do post-disaster assessments include forest loss? Almost never. This is a blind spot. If we don't count it, it doesn't count. Let's look at the full landscape. 34% of nearly 500,000 hectares damaged. Mangroves lost 50%. Plantations 100% destroyed. Imagine the impacts to livelihood. The number to carry out in this room is 118 million metric tons of CO2 release because of the damaged vegetation and damaged biomass. This is just one typhoon, my friends. One region, roughly a mid-sized country's annual emission, completely invisible in current frameworks. If you imagine 180 million metric tons of CO2e, imagine a medium-sized coal-fired power plant operating for 18 years. That is equivalent emission of the destroyed forest in Palawan. So for scientists, this means verified, spatially explicit data. For policymakers, a carbon feedback loop demanding a response. But for funders, this means scale of what we're failing to measure. This is the Palawan hornbill. This is endemic to the Philippines, forest-dependent species. It is threatened, and as I said, it's entirely dependent on intact forests. Habitat suitability modeling shows its range contracting dramatically after Rye. You can see that blue is unsuitable habitat, red is suitable habitat. So because of Rye, the suitable habitats have contracted dramatically. So non-economic losses are not abstractions. They're the futures of the species that exist nowhere else in the world. These are the first casualties, and they cannot speak for themselves. We did the same for 5 different species, trigger species, all endemic, all threatened: a bird, an amphibian, and a tree. Of course, the bird's there. Everyone shows habitat contraction, and watch the red high suitability zone shrink after the typhoon. This species level evidence is what loss and damage negotiations have been missing. Most of the conversations in COPs, in meetings, is all about loss and damage from the economic sector. But these are missing. GARF generates this systematically, replicably, and at a cost that scales. So again, if we don't count it, it does not count. But with GARF, now we can. And now it does count. And then communities told us what no satellites could. Rivers dried up, Almasiga resin trees harvested for generations destroyed. Honey sources, rattan livelihoods, croplands gone. That means cultural losses, spiritual losses, identity losses. As real as any damaged bridge and deserving the same recognition in our framework. If we don't count it, it doesn't count. GARF doesn't stop at diagnosis. It prescribes a treatment. a multi-agency and multi-sectoral technical working group drives the green recovery plans. We've identified and established restoration catalyst plots, at least 1 hectare each. And these plots go exactly where our data says they'll deliver the greatest ecological return. So we use this as a recovery and restoration modality. This is government in action for policymakers, evidence-based restoration for scientists, and measurable outcomes for funders. And it can work, and it has worked. In fact, the local governments of Palawan committed 10% of what is needed, 10% of the budget needed for restoration. The entire value of the restoration need is 1.2 billion pesos. I don't know how's that computed in your currency, but 10% of that was committed by local government. Because local governments have understood the value of ecosystems in their operations and the livelihoods of people that depend on these ecosystems. We also took GARF underwater. This is in the Siargao Island in the far south of the Philippines. Sort of the entry wound of Typhoon Rai, and the exit wound would have been Palawan. If you can see in this map, coral reef declined 48%, nearly 50%. That's about 6,725 hectares. Seagrass surged 177%. This is not recovery, my friends, but a regime shift, filling a void where the corals, the void left by dead corals. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos depend on coastal systems for food and protection. Yet marine losses remain a massive blind spot. If we don't count it, it does not count. So we didn't just build a framework and publish a paper. We took it to the field. GARF was trained across sites devastated by Odette and other storms since 2021. A framework that only works in the lab is worthless. So GARF was designed for DNR, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, our Environment Ministry. It's designed for them. Real people, real zones, real pressures. The deployment sites, as you can see, those pins, span from Palawan to the Visayas and elsewhere. Each represent distinct ecosystem, distinct disaster profile, and community context. Every site contributed to the refinement of the framework, increasing its adaptability and robustness. Now, the results to date are significant. GARF has been applied across 2 biospheres, a biosphere reserve in the Philippines, 21 protected areas, and 28 major pilot sites. More than 350 DNR personnel have been trained. A DNR administrative order, a policy to institutionalize the framework department-wide is pending. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources, our Environment Ministry, has formally adopted the GARF. This is no longer a pilot now. It is transitioning to a national policy. GARF operates within the borders of, within a broader ecosystem of complementary tools. The PENCAS Act, which is the Natural Capital Accounting Law, which was passed in 2024, establishes the Natural Capital Accounting Framework. The Sukat ng Kalikasan, a book that was published, launched a year ago as well, provides a standardized biodiversity metrics. It operationalizes the PENCAS. The green recovery plans convert the assessment data into actionable strategies. Together, these instruments form an integrated system rather than an isolated initiatives. So sukat ng kalikasan, which we're quite proud of, means, from our language, translated to English, is measurement of nature. This is a science-driven biodiversity management framework. It employs 6 core metrics and 4-tier quality standards, from bronze to more rudimentary to platinum, a more advanced and more complicated, a complex set of data. Its relevance to GARF is direct. Sukat ng kalikasan establishes a pre-disaster baselines required for meaningful before and after comparison. Without baseline data, post-disaster loss can't be quantified. So sukat ng kalikasan feeds into PENCAS, the national accounting. GARF feeds into loss and damage policy, and together they bridge the gap between data and policy action. The tiered standard deliberately is pragmatic. Not every area possesses platinum level data. However, bronze level data substantially exceeds what most countries currently maintain. Next slide. Okay. So GARF, Sukat ng Kalikasan, and PENCAS are not independent initiatives. They function as an integrated system. The GARF addresses post-disaster assessment, Sukat ng Kalikasan supplies pre-disaster baselines, and PENCAS translates both into national accounts accessible to policymakers. Outputs feed into the National Disaster National Adaptation Plan, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, Ecosystem-Based Disaster Risk Reduction, and the ASEAN Regional Models. The Philippines has constructed a complete pipeline in this case. Field data to assessment, to valuation, to national accounts, to policy action. The relevant question for this audience is who will follow? We face real obstacles in doing GARF, piloting it, and so on, such as limited baselines. The problem with cloud cover is always there, especially for island nations. Attribution challenges and dangerous access to disaster areas. Every obstacle, however, produces an innovation. For example, we use a combination of satellite plus ground truthing. We did habitat modeling. We did community-based monitoring, merging with indigenous knowledge with science. The proof it works, DNR has adopted a GARF for national deployment. No longer a pilot, now an institutional infrastructure. But 4 gaps remain, and this is a challenge for everyone. We always don't have pre-disaster baselines because we do not count. We do not measure nature. Next would be long-term monitoring. After doing the assessment, there should be long-term monitoring plots or monitoring of ecosystems across the landscape and seascape. The third is that although we tried out the methodologies for marine, we do not have the methodology as yet for wetlands. And I invite everyone here to maybe think about measuring impacts of extreme weather events on wetlands. And also the metrics for cultural and spiritual biodiversity values, or the plural values of nature to people. With the 4 gaps, 4 opportunities to match. Alignment with the UN SEA and the Frame Eco for global standards. Maybe use AI and remote sensing for real-time detection. and the South-South cooperation to scale Gulf internationally. Now the methodology exists. What we need now is a collective will. So perhaps to close this, I'll end with this slide saying that ecosystems are the first responders and the first victims, first casualties. And I leave 3 messages. The first, ecosystem losses are measurable and significant. Globally, they put ecosystem losses as non-economic. Maybe with Sukat na Kalikasan, that is not true anymore. Measurement of ecosystem losses must be in every post-disaster assessment. In the case study I've shown you, presented to you, this is extreme weather events. There is scope for looking at or developing methodologies for slow onset events. For example, sea level rise, incremental increase in temperature, etc. Or prolonged drought, El Nino and La Nina. The second take-home message is that the GAR's 2 or 3 stages approach is replicable in any disaster-prone nation. And the third, international frameworks like Frame Eco and UNSEA will build the global evidence base these losses deserve. Again, if we don't count it, it does not count. Today we've shown you that we can. The question is, will we? So thank you and good afternoon, everyone. If you want to quiz me, ping me through these social accounts, and ganda hapon sa ating lahat. Salamat.